Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Kim. I'm the Regional Director and Transportation Lead at the Pembina Institute. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar entitled Building Canada's Zero Emission Vehicle Economy. In the next hour, we will be discussing the topic of zero emission technologies and vehicles and its role in rebuilding Canada's economy. As we emerge from COVID-19, there is significant opportunities that lie ahead in creating jobs and stimulating our domestic economy through major investments in electric vehicle production, including building on Canada's leadership in developing and producing hydrogen fuel cell technology. I'll be your moderator today, but I am joined here today by my Pembina colleagues, Cedric Smith, who is a co-author to our recent report with the International Council on Clean Transportation entitled Power Play, Canada's Role in the Electric Vehicle Transition, as well as my colleague Kelly O'Connor, who's our communications director and is also helping to produce the webinar in the back end. During the webinar, we will be keeping everyone on mute, but please do send in your questions through the questions panel as you think of them. We've saved a lot of time at the end of the presentations for Q&A, and we'll do our best to address all the questions that you might have. And finally, I wanted to note that the webinar will be recorded and sent to all attendees early next week. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. We have a fantastic lineup for today. We have Ben Sharp, who is the Senior Researcher and Canada Lead at the International Council on Clean Transportation. He is leading ICCT's strategy on zero-emission commercial vehicles in North America. We have Patrick Gervais, who is the VP of Marketing and Communications at the Lion Electric. We have Sarah Oud, who's the CEO of Propulsion Quebec. She was named the CEO of Propulsion Quebec, a new cluster for electric and smart transportation, and is tasked with positioning the province as one of the sector's global leaders. We also have Mark Kirby, who's the President and CEO of the Canada Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. He joined the association in 2019 and has a long history in leading the commercialization of many clean technologies, including hydrogen energy technologies. Before we jump into our presentations, I want to just frame our conversation today under this new COVID-19 and economic context. We know that there are many frontline and essential workers that are working to keep us safe during this time. Businesses are racing to retool and fill critical healthcare needs. Governments are working tirelessly to roll out urgently needed financial relief and essential services. These efforts are paramount as we strive to flatten the curve in this pandemic. And as that essential work continues, many of us are looking ahead at the eventual task of rebuilding Canada's economy when we finally emerge. At the Pembina Institute, we developed a set of principles and recommendations that can be made across the sectors on how we may rebuild Canada. And from our perspective, it requires immediate financial relief for workers, businesses, and communities. And it also requires major investments to stimulate our economy and insulate the workers against future shocks. So I would encourage you to check out our principles and recommendations on our website. You can find more details there. I do want to highlight just the principles that we have outlined. And Cedric, if you can go to the next slide. Number one, prioritize funding for jobs resilient to economic disruptions, in a world that is limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. We need to prioritize investments in industries producing low and zero carbon goods and services, use investments in industry to incentivize decarbonization beyond existing regulatory requirements, and make stimulus decisions through the lens of meeting climate commitments. In particular, in the auto sector, in order for us to thrive post-pandemic, as I mentioned, there's significant opportunities that lie ahead in creating jobs and stimulating the domestic economy through zero-emission vehicle technologies and gearing up both the demand and production of EVs. But let's hear more from our panelists on their solutions on what investments are needed to ensure Canada becomes an auto manufacturing heavy hitter again, all while taking steps to a low carbon economy. So first up, I'd like to invite Ben Sharp to present on this topic. Over to you, Ben.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's wonderful to be a part of this session, and it's been really terrific working with Pembina and the team there. And I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the key takeaways from the power play study that Carolyn mentioned. So one of the things that we did when we first started looking at the issue of vehicle manufacturing in Canada is that we wanted to put Canada in the global context. So Canada produces about 2 million light-duty vehicles per year, which ranks Canada 12th in the world. But when we take the long view over the past 20 years, Canada has slipped from, they used to be 5th, and now they're 12th. So, and also that's seen a net loss of 5 assembly plants during that time. So when we look at the set of vehicles that Canada is currently producing on the light duty vehicle side, here are the 12 vehicle models and where they're produced in Southern Ontario. But what really jumps out is that there's only one plug-in vehicle that's currently being produced. That's the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid electric. About 9,000 of those vehicles were produced in 2018. So that really kind of underscores this really significant issue that Canada really isn't producing that many electric vehicles, particularly on the light duty vehicle side. So this slide helps to put Canada into the global context, looking at some of the other major auto producing countries in the world. So this figure shows light duty vehicle production on the x-axis and electric vehicle production on the y-axis. All of the countries above the gray dotted line have electric vehicle shares that are above the global average in 2018, which was 2.3%. And conversely, all of the countries below that gray dotted line have electric vehicle shares below 2.3%. So when we look at Canada, that 9,000 Chrysler Pacificas represents about 0.4% of their overall vehicle production. So again, just really wanted to emphasize the point that Canada is lagging behind other countries, particularly other countries that produce similar numbers of vehicles per year, such as the UK or France. Those countries have much higher electric vehicle shares in their manufacturing sector. So that was kind of the whole thrust of this analysis, was trying to think about policies that can help Canada really boost their electric vehicle production and associated supply chains. So here are some of the kind of 5 policy takeaways from the work. And one of the biggest things that we want to emphasize is that the predominant action that Canada can do to really grow domestic manufacturing is to continue to really drive a robust sales market in Canada. So we can't underscore that point enough. What we're seeing globally is that most of the vehicles, 80% of electric vehicles, are made in the same country in which they're sold. So that's a really significant point, and something that we think is a really exciting result to come out of this research. Because Canada is already doing a lot to really drive demand in terms of making incentives available, investing in charging infrastructure. But of course, there's always room to do more, and Canada really needs to put a bigger focus on policy framework and able to hit the really aggressive and ambitious goals for 2030 and 2040 in terms of fully transitioning to 100% electric vehicle sales by 2040. So in addition to those market demand policies, there's certainly room for really putting a focus on the industrial side support. So giving manufacturers and suppliers, incentives and building programs and really making Canada as attractive a destination as possible for making these electric vehicles, both on the light and the heavy duty vehicle side. One of the things that we looked at in the report was looking at the transit bus space. One of the things that we looked at in terms of policy interventions is this Buy Canadian idea. We've seen kind of the impacts of Buy American be very significant in terms of really driving manufacturing by having those requirements for US content and vehicles and buses. And we think that the similar phenomenon can happen on the Canadian side. So in addition to setting the really ambitious goals for 2040 for light duty, we think that Canada has a really big opportunity to do the same on the commercial vehicle side. So we're really emphasizing that that should kind of be the next frontier in terms of setting a long-term goal for when Canada can fully transition over to zero-emission trucks and buses. And finally, as Carolyn mentioned, the auto sector workforce and the impacted communities really need support from a policy perspective. We certainly can't leave these workers and these communities behind. So that's one of the things that we're really excited about in future work is trying to get a better handle on what are some of the labor specific policies that can support this overall policy framework. So there's several other elements that I hope to get into in the Q&A. Hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles was also a major part of our report. But for now, given the time constraints, Carolyn, I'm going to pass it back over to you. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Ben. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick up next. Patrick, over to you.
Hello. Well, hopefully you're able to see my screen. So hello, I'm Patrick Gervais. I'm the Vice President of Communication Marketing for the Lion Electric Company. Ben, I have to say that what you just said was music to my ears, and I hope that in your next report, Canada is going to be our primary market, and then we're going to be selling most of our vehicles in Canada. Lion Electric, we're an OEM. We built 100% electric heavy-duty vehicles. We're established in Saint-Jérôme. It's 45 minutes north of Montreal in the province of Quebec. And we are also established across North America. We have an experience center in Albany, New York. We're quite strongly established in Sacramento, California, and Los Angeles. We just opened this week an office in Seattle. We'll be opening more experience centers, about 5 in the United States in the next 12 months. And I'm really happy to say that we're just about to sign a lease in British Columbia to be present on both sides of the country. We're mostly well known for our school buses. Obviously, when we decided to go 100% electric, school buses was the best vehicle to go with because of its routes. You know, in the morning, they go and drive students to school and they have a break and then they go and pick them up at the end of the day. School buses are built on a Class 7 chassis, so it was really just common sense for us to go with the commercial trucks. Last March, we started in 2019, March 2019, we launched our urban commercial truck, which is a Class 8. And we're also going to be commercializing a Class 6 in 2020. We're just about doing our first deliveries in May. And the Class 7 and the Class 5 we'll see today in 2021. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we're also going to have a tractor trailer truck. And then not the least, but the last, it's the middle. It's the buses, the minibus that we are also producing. It's a 26-foot long bus, which was made for mostly for special needs, and also for shuttles for airports, schools. We have over 300 school buses driving this, children to school every day. It's been our first school buses 100% electric saw the day in 2016. This is happening right now. This is not just storytelling. It's not a university project. It's really 100% electric heavy duty vehicles are there. They're built here in Canada and all ready to be deployed. As you know, and then we've talked a little bit about it, transportation is the largest source of pollution on the planet. Just here in Canada, it's 25% of GHG emission total, just 1% less than energy production, and it's a rise of 54% since 1990. Obviously, with COVID-19 and the recovery, I think it's really important that we put sustainable economy and carbon neutral economy at the heart of the recovery. We cannot go back to where we were before. I mean, the Seine is in the bottom of the river right now. The water is clear, but as the recovery goes on and business starts like it used to be, the Seine's going to come up. And then we've seen that when we take care of the environment and we make the right moves, then we're getting results. Ben talked about it a little bit. I think we have in Canada a lot of people involved in heavy duty electrification of transportation, and we need to make sure that our different companies like us are being put forward, and programs are being put forward to make sure that electrification of transportation happens. Obviously, there's a big difference between the acquisition price. Even though on the total cost of ownership, the electric will always be better, no matter what, without even incentives. But you need to have incentives to reduce the price from diesel to the different price of acquisition between diesel and electric. Volume commitment. Obviously, for us, if we get volume commitment, we'll be able to negotiate prices, and we guarantee from 5 years from now that diesel and electric will be the same price. Laws and regulation. We need to make sure there's some regulations and objective put into the transition to zero emission. Obviously, communication. A lot of people don't know about electrification of transportation. If we survey people, 97% of people think that electrification of transportation is going to happen 5 years from now, but it's available as we're speaking. Infrastructure. It's really something that needs to be, educated about. It's not complicated to put infrastructures on. Make sure that you have the right infrastructure. You need to make sure that the cost of the infrastructure that you're putting on is the right one for you. We talked about the Buy Canadian Act, or at least have 100% assembly in Canada, making sure that we encourage our Canadian companies. It's important, and for us, the lowest bidder in any kind of industrial activity, lowest bidder procedures are against innovation. Innovation and lowest bidder just doesn't work. So we need to put, we need to eliminate the lowest bidder policies. A little bit more about the economy and Lion. Just us, Lion, we have more than 300 employees in Canada, and we have about 30 in the United States. And by 2026, it's 1,000 jobs that Lion will have directly. We have contributed to about 2,000 indirect jobs as today, and in 5 years from now, it's going to be 11,000, jobs created direct and indirect, with an average of $50,000 salary. But one of the things that we're mostly proud of is really by using Canadian suppliers. We use over, we have about 450 different suppliers that we use, and then 250 of them are Canadian. That's more than half, and we're really proud of this. And one of the things that people don't know is that 75% of the parts we use are Canadian. Obviously, we need to use some other suppliers that comes from outside Canada, but 75% of the components is Canadian made. So there's a lot of things in electrification of transportation, that it's really, really good for the economy. We have some great companies in Canada. We just need to make the policies right to encourage the Canadian companies for us to be present and get better quality of life and better environment, and also some return on investments, because electric is just not good for the environment. It's also a viable business model. Well,
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Patrick, for sharing some of those really interesting statistics. What really jumped out to me was the job expectations, both today and in 5 years from now. 11,000 jobs, I think I heard you said, in the next 5 years, both direct and indirect. And you did mention a couple of policy recommendations. Looking forward to discussing those a little bit more in the Q&A regarding incentives and innovation in procurement policy. Next up, we have Sarah Oud from Propulsion Quebec. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, everyone at Pembina's for inviting us. So Propulsion Quebec, we are an industrial cluster for electric and smart transportation in Quebec. So we represent basically companies that are just like Lion Electrical, who's a proud member of Propulsion. So we represent companies just like Lion, who works in the electric and smart transportation. Also within our membership, we have research centers, universities, even investment funds, so institutions, banks that support those companies. And we also have the clients. So in Quebec, we do not manufacture passenger cars. We assemble basically everything else between electric scooters and electric trains within that spectrum. And so the clients of our industry are mainly fleet managers, either public or private. So those clients are also part of the group, and so we can work on reducing the time for developing new innovation that answers those clients' needs, and also the manufacturers and the suppliers are all present, so we can really accelerate the growth of our industry in Quebec. And this is really our mission at Propulsion Quebec, is to accelerate the growth of our industry. We in Quebec, the electric smart transportation, just in a nutshell, what we mean by that is ground transportation, not air or sea. So ground transportation, going from so everybody that works within the electric vehicle, from assembling vehicles to manufacturing components to even the natural resources that are needed for battery developments, software, hardware for charging infrastructure, also for smart vehicles, so hardware and software for connected or autonomous vehicles, smart infrastructure, and also new models for mobility. So in Quebec also we have a lot of companies that have developed new business model for car sharing, carpooling, bike sharing, that kind of thing. So this is really what we cover. So within the scope of our work recently with the COVID crisis, we have put together all the arguments, I would say, that we have developed in the last few years. We're a fairly recent organization, just we created 2 years and a half ago, but we have published many studies, and so we have put together all those arguments about our industry, our potential contribution to Quebec's and Canada's economy, and we have developed a memorandum that we have shared with Quebec and Canada's government, and here are some of the insights. And I think that will also really be a good segue to what Ben and Patrick have presented before, and to answer the question on how we can contribute as an industry to our country's economic recovery. So first we have really very important strategic assets. Cedric, if you could just come back to a few slides. Yeah, here. So just quickly, our industry, this is just the numbers for Quebec, but I'm sure Ben could answer also for the rest of Canada. But in Quebec, our industry is about, just for the manufacturers, about 6,500 jobs for about 150 companies. But we expect it to grow exponentially in the next few years, just following the curve that we have seen in other KPIs, such as sorry, I'm looking for the translation in English here. Patents, deposits in the last few years. So we have other KPIs that really expect us to see that those numbers grow in the next few years. Also, we are really present in all the value chain. That's Patrick was saying that before, and that's really, really interesting. By selling more vehicles, we give jobs to a whole lot of other suppliers within the supply chain that are present in Quebec and Canada. And these suppliers are present everywhere within the territory. In Quebec, this is particularly the case. It's not only concentrated in just one or two cities. It's really spread out within the territory, so that we can have a structural effect on a lot of cities and spaces, territories across the country. Also, we have salaries that are between 18% and 51% higher than other industries. So this is really interesting in terms of public investment for, again, to have a structural effect on the economy. And we also have very important, we have calculated that for every dollar that's invested in the production in our industry, there is a ripple effect on the economy for about between 4 and 8 jobs that are created, and there is a return between $400,000 and $800,000 for every million that's invested. So there's really a great ripple effect on the economy. Again, not to mention all the environmental effect that are also economic effect, of course. And also there's also a super nice opportunity to raise the productivity of our economies when you transfer a line of production for traditional vehicles, ICE vehicles, to new future and environmentally friendly vehicles. When you do that transition for your line of production, it's a great opportunity to increase productivity. And again, I think it's a segue to what Ben was saying before. So we have put together some recommendations for governments. And if you can just skip slides, Cedric, thank you. And the first one really is that we could modernize our public procurement practices and rules, and really have this this national project of transitioning of our public fleets, and then inspire private fleets to do the same by giving them incentives, namely for medium and heavy vehicles. At the federal and the provincial level in Quebec, we have incentive for light duty vehicles, but not both level of governments for medium and heavy. And this is a great opportunity. All those vehicles within fleets are always on the road, and there's a really great opportunity for transitioning here, both for environmental and economic reasons. So basically, we have other proposal, but maybe I will keep that for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. I also heard a lot of really great points here from not just the economic, environmental benefits, but the economic benefits that can be really driven from, investments in a zero emission vehicle economy. Let's go over to Mark Kirby, our last presenter. Over to you.
Hi there, thanks Carolyn, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody here. Hopefully we can have a good discussion and provide a little information and insight for people. I represent the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. We're a nonprofit industry association representing Canada's leading hydrogen fuel cell sector. I want to start by just highlighting what Ben Sharp said at the beginning. If we want to have growth in jobs, attract investment in Canada, in zero-emission vehicles, in fact, in all aspects of clean technology, then we absolutely need to be deploying in Canada. And I want to step back just a little bit and talk about hydrogen energy, which includes the electric vehicles, but also has some broader implications. And we think it's very important that Canada move forward on deploying hydrogen energy over the next years. Why? We've sort of three reasons. Number one, it's essential. Studies have been done around the world, and they show that we absolutely need to be deploying hydrogen energy to fully decarbonize our economy by 2050, and especially do that in a cost-effective and timely way. And why? Because it's needed in industrial processing and heating for everything from steel, chemical, residential, commercial heating, etc. It's needed for supporting clean power production. In order to grow our renewable and clean power sector, we need to support that through hydrogen generation, load management, storage backup, etc. And we will be able, in combination with clean power generation, be able to produce low-cost hydrogen and do that at very cost-effective ways. And then, of course, it's also needed to decarbonize transportation. Now, when we talk about fuel cells, we're talking about battery fuel cell hybrids. These are electric vehicles. They have batteries, they have electric drives, but they also incorporate a fuel cell and hydrogen storage to increase the range and allow fast filling. And that provides a choice for users to now be able to use those in applications where range and productivity are critical. And such things as buses, trains, trucks, lifestyle, material handling, etc. Many areas that can now be electrified by combining battery technology and fuel cell technology. All of this says that we're going to need lots and lots of hydrogen as we move forward. Second reason why we should be deploying hydrogen energy is because it's Canadian. We have been leading in this area for decades. We have world-leading companies. This shows some of the companies in the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. They're involved in projects around the world and are recognized leaders. We have people in technology, in production of fuel cell products and components, in hydrogen equipment, and in many other areas. So if we're going to see hydrogen deployment, it's going to lead more than our fair share of benefits going to flow to Canada in terms of investment, jobs, exportable technology, and products. And the third reason why we think hydrogen is critical is because it's inclusive. There's many options to make hydrogen. It can be made from fossil fuels, and then we're talking low carbon intensity hydrogen, so zero emission of CO2s. It can be made from fossil fuels with sequestration. It can be made from renewable power. It can be made from nuclear power. It can be made from biomass. There's many ways to take advantage of Canada's abundant energy resources and convert that into low carbon intensity hydrogen. And Canada actually has the opportunity to be the low cost producer of hydrogen globally. It provides options for Canadian companies and individuals to have a choice in how they want to electrify and go to zero emission. They can drive further, fill faster by using hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and they can process greener and burn cleaner by using hydrogen in place of other fuels for combustion, processing, and heating applications. So those are the three reasons. It's essential, it's Canadian, and it's inclusive. And it's also happening. We have many fuel cell electric products out there now. We have cars, we have buses that are commercially available, and this just shows the work that's being done in the area of heavy duty trucks by companies around the world to develop fuel cell products. So we are seeing this moving forward. But what's needed? Well, again, why we need it, and particularly why we need it for ZEVs. It provides a choice for for users to be able to select the product that best meets their needs when they want to electrify their fleets and go to zero emission. It can allow us to decarbonize all types of transportation, and it allows us actually to speed up going to zero emission vehicles, because we can be moving forward on both the electric battery front and also on the fuel cell front. But of course, there's a challenge. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. To commit their operations to hydrogen energy, Canadians need to understand it. They need to see commercial products, and they need to see cost-effective hydrogen supply. Well, at the same time, to make those necessary investments in developing those products, and in putting in place that hydrogen infrastructure, OEMs and hydrogen suppliers need to see confirmed demand for their products. And that is a bit of a concern, because we have time. As everybody knows, time is of the essence. We need to be moving forward. And so we have a concern around loss of Canadian leadership, and also laying our groundwork for post-2030 GHG reductions. So as an association, what we're promoting is as we move forward into the stimulus area, we would like to see governments making visible commitments to hydrogen energy, and recognizing that it is an essential part of getting to net zero 2050. In the same way that clean power generation, energy efficiency, biofuels, battery vehicles, et cetera, are essential, we need to be also incorporating hydrogen technology. We're looking for supportive policies, things like the Clean Fuel Standard to be moved forward, and to have teeth, and to be helping to push forward the adoption of zero emission vehicles and other applications for hydrogen. We of course need to see zero emission vehicle support and mandates in place. We need to see a plan and support for hydrogen infrastructure, planning for all the hydrogen that's going to be needed. And as mentioned, there's going to be a lot of hydrogen needed. We need to be thinking about how that's going to be produced, and start laying the groundwork for that hydrogen production and distribution, and doing that in combination with our electrical grid. We need sector transformation task forces to start education and addressing the key barriers, whether those are regulatory or codes and standards, to be looking at specific sectors and helping to advance those sectors. We need, as has been mentioned before, subsidies for ZEV early adopters. We believe those should be technology neutral, so applying to both battery and fuel cell electric. But we do need that support for those early adopters of ZEV vehicles. Of course, we need increased support for R&D and demonstration. Canada has world-leading researchers in the hydrogen fuel cell space, both in the public sector and universities, and in the private sector, and that work needs to continue. And then we'd also like to see stimulus projects move forward to start that conversion, moving forward in select geographies, in select sectors, to start making that transition to hydrogen energy happen, and happen soon. That's where I'd like to end at this point, but I look forward to further discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Mark, for that presentation. Again, lots of rich commentary there about what we can do in terms of strengthening our policy framework to increase hydrogen fuel cell technology and just zero emission vehicles in Canada. I wanted to point to some remarks that other organization and thought leaders have on this topic. We heard a lot of policy solutions from our panelists, but I want to turn it quickly to a couple of other folks who have some ideas on the question of what can Canada do to ensure it emerges from COVID-19 with a robust zero emission vehicle manufacturer sector. And first, I'd like to turn it over to a remark from Jeff Turner, who is a senior research lead at Clean Mobility at Dunsky, and he says a healthy local market for ZEVs is essential to building Canada's ZEV manufacturing sector. Canada's post-COVID-19 stimulus efforts should include policies that stimulate sales of these vehicles. I want to also point to a remark from Ken Bondi, who's the national representative of Unifor, and of course a big push for bolstering the ZEV economy has to do with job creation and making sure we have a just transition. And he says, manufacturing investments follows demand. We need a national auto strategy that mandates local procurement purchasing for federal and provincial ZEV vehicle fleet purchases, including mass transit and service vehicles. So a lot of common thread there between what was shared from the panelists. I guess my first question to the panelists are, we heard a lot of policy measures, and I'm wondering if you could kind of lay out a distinction between what is most urgently needed in the short term vis-a-vis the next, 6 months to year to 2 years versus what are the kinds of policy measures that are needed for the medium term. So looking at the 3 to 5 horizon, I'm just wondering if you can help kind of guide what should be prioritized over between now and a 5-year period. So maybe what I can do is go to Ben Sharp for your remarks first.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carolyn. It's a great framing of the issue, so thanks for that. I think one of the at least from our view, one really attractive idea in terms of providing overall stimulus to the economy, but also continuing to push electric drive in Canada, is to build out some kind of a scrappage program, early scrappage, and have really attractive incentives for electric vehicles. So really pushing consumers and end users towards these vehicles. But I think the government will certainly be interested in policies that can support the entire auto sector. So, how that's structured is obviously very much up for design considerations. But I think that just overall, some type of a program to really stimulate the entire auto sector could be really attractive, provided that there are those special carve-outs and dollars that can be put towards electric drive. I think more longer term, once we emerge from this COVID situation, the ICCT is firmly of the belief that ZEV regulations, so programs that require increasing percentages of sales over time of electric vehicles, are exactly what is needed to really get Canada to actually achieve its long-term goals. So that's something that we think it should not kind of fall to the wayside. I know that regulatory programs are certainly not so popular, particularly in times of economic downturn. But just in terms of their efficacy, what we've seen globally is that these types of regulatory programs are the surest way to really build up that demand and supply at the same time.
Great, thanks so much. And I kind of want to ask Patrick and Sarah, because you both raised the point about, modernizing our procurement policies. Would you say this is something that can proceed quite quickly and this should be prioritized? Would like to hear your thoughts of what the roadmap could look like between now and 5 years from now.
Well, definitely one of the things is that we need to take action. I mean, there's been a lot of talking and, people are saying, hey, yes, we want to electrify Canada, but nothing is happening. So we need some programs to make sure things are happening. I mean, first, what works the best, if you want something to go fast on the market, it's incentives. So you need to make sure that, businesses have incentives on a short-term period of time. So because, the environment is really, obviously people are aware and touched by, making a better environment. But at the end of the day, it's how much money that they're going to have in their pockets left. So if it's too expensive, they're not going to go towards a sustainable vehicle or carbon neutral vehicle. So that's, if you want to, accelerate electrification, you need some incentives. And incentives, it's not all only money. There's a bunch of different stuff. Like you could get, on the commercial side, because we sell, heavy duty vehicles are mostly business to business. So we sell them to transportation company. So, having longer contracts, if you have electric vehicles on your fleet. 5 years, 8 years instead of 5 years. In ports, when you're getting to ports, if you have a special lane, your truck or could go, be prioritized. A bunch of different stuff like that. Obviously, the biggest break for electrification right now, it's the acquisition cost, because people are looking at the acquisition cost and the operation cost. Even though 80%, even though the savings on the energy cost is 80% and on the maintenance 60%, it's really how we're, can we be able to diminish the difference between both of them. And then after that, given the example as a Canadian, electrifying their own fleet, if the government does it, it must be good, so everyone else is going to be doing it. So a bunch of small things, not too complicated, not only throwing money on the table, but just giving examples and then putting the electrification forward will surely speed things up.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Focusing on fleets, I think, is a really quick win. First, because you get bulk buying, and that really has a bigger impact on the economic impact. So that's one thing. The second thing is you have private and public fleets. Public fleets are dealt with procurement and changes, which take a little more time. So if you want really a quick win, private fleets with incentive, just like it was done for individual cars, should be done as quickly as possible. It's ready to implement. It's quick to implement, and it really has an immediate impact on the sales. And this is really what our companies they really need right now is to make sales, so they get more cash flow, and they increase their cash flow. They can hire people back, and then they can start production lines again. So yeah, and just to answer very quickly your question, I think incentive for private fleets for medium and heavy vehicles would be a very, very quick win.
I'd like to add just something to that, because I absolutely agree that incentives are critical. And our members work around the world, and if you look around the world where electric vehicles are being deployed, there's actually a combination. It's being deployed in places where there are incentives, certainly, but also where there's that policy framework that is pushing the users to adopt it as well. And those need to go hand in hand. So if you look around the world where electric vehicles are being deployed, they're being deployed in places where there are zero emission vehicle mandates or requirements. So places like China, where you can't go into the downtown with a gas powered vehicle. In Europe, where they're requiring that for their buses. And California, those are the places where you're actually seeing zero emission vehicles deployed. So I think we have to, yes, incentives are great and we want to have them, but you need the private sector putting their money in as well, and they will do that if they start seeing a business requirement that they have to start going that direction. So I think it has to go hand in hand with those zero emission vehicle requirements or mandates in some form that push people to consider those electric vehicles.
And Mark, while I have you here, we have a question from the audience for you, and I would welcome other remarks from those on the panel. A question about what steps are being taken by government and industry to develop clean supply of affordable hydrogen for HFC infrastructure. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, my pet peeve. We need to be moving forward on getting our clean hydrogen infrastructure in place, and there are projects underway. Canada is fortunate that we're actually the world's largest producer of low carbon intensity hydrogen. We do that in Quebec from hydropower with 2 large liquid plants that supply hydrogen around to North America. And we do that, believe it or not, in Alberta, where we produce it from fossil fuels, but capture and sequester the CO2 produced. That's used now it is captive to the chemical and refining industry, but will be being made available to transportation and heating applications. So some of the things that are going on across the country, in BC, we're working on getting a power to gas project underway, which will also have hydrogen available for transportation. In Alberta, looking to extend the hydrogen pipeline to make blue hydrogen available for transportation applications in the Edmonton area, both buses and heavy duty trucks. Looking to expand what's happening in Quebec looking in Ontario, where we have an interesting project using peaking power to make hydrogen, to actually help in grid management, and now looking to expand that, and also looking to work with OPG around using their off-peak power to make hydrogen, to improve their business case and to make efficient use of our assets in Ontario. So there is work that's going forward, but there is certainly some stimulus efforts that are needed to accelerate those. And again, I go to the policy side of it. Making sure we have the low carbon fuel standard moving forward will help provide the business case for the generation of hydrogen and its use in heating applications and in transportation applications. So it's a combination, policy and support to be able to move some of these projects forward.
So just to quickly pick up and build on one of Mark's comments. So we're really excited, and just to kind of preview some research that we have coming up. So Mark mentioned Alberta-sourced blue hydrogen. So we're likely to be taking on some work to look at some of the early demand centers on the West Coast, particularly in California. Mark mentioned the ZEV regulation that we have coming in the pipeline. So we're really expecting to see a larger number of zero-emission trucks in California. And we're going to be exploring the techno-economic impacts of potentially bringing blue hydrogen from Alberta to the West Coast, and doing some analysis to see how that impacts the economics. I think one of the key constraints that we're seeing in California currently is some of the high cost of the hydrogen fuel. So this Alberta source hydrogen coming in at a low carbon as well as low cost, I think could be really interesting and exciting to look at.
That's an excellent point, Ben. There's a lot of interest in pipelines running south from the Alberta heartland down to Calgary to help the Calgary decarbonize, and then carrying on down and connecting with pipelines leading down to California. There's also the opportunity to go as say across the Rockies, perhaps twinning the Trans Mountain with a hydrogen pipeline, and be able to start supplying the global export market. And it's not just California. Japan now is moving forward to start importing hydrogen from Australia, and we're a lot closer than Australia, so we should be able to supply them better. Korea and China both need it, as well, of course, as Europe. Germany is looking to import hydrogen from Spain, from Portugal, from North Africa, as well as from the North Sea. So there's a lot of work being done to start getting large quantities of low-cost hydrogen available for transportation applications around the world. And Canada is incredibly well positioned to supply that need. But again, not only with fossil fuel sequestration, also with our biomass, with our renewable power, and with even our off-peak nuclear power. So there's many ways that Canada can participate in the production and distribution and supply of hydrogen.
I want to kind of pivot the conversation and talk about electrification of commercial fleets. And Patrick and Sarah, I'd like to get your first thoughts on this. Of course, the question is always who pays. When it comes to government's role and the role of the private sector as it relates to charging infrastructure. So we have a question from the audience about this. When it comes to commercial fleets, is it more important to have financial supports available for business to procure and build their own private charging infrastructure? What is the role of government when it comes to supporting that infrastructure need? Patrick, can I go to you first?
Sure. I mean, obviously, infrastructure is, people now are saying we're not going to go. It's not we're not going to go electric. It's how we're going to go electric. We don't have to convince people. It's different from 3 to 5 years ago. And infrastructure is probably the worst, worries, the most worries about and unknown. But it's not complicated at all. Obviously, there's electricity in every building, and the thing is that there's a lot of different charging infrastructures, and depending on the needs that you have and the electricity that you have on your building, you could easily implement some infrastructures. should it be private or public? There's a bunch of different models that are being presented now. I mean, obviously, in the province of infrastructure, probably you should pay for your own infrastructure. There's a bunch of incentive programs where you could get help to pay your infrastructure. But depending on if you need level 2, level 3, there's more and more charging stations that are not very expensive anymore. We've seen, it's a business model that's evolving quite fast. So, I mean, you could own your infrastructure, but there's a bunch of different business models that will come up in the next couple of years. For example, you could lease the batteries on a commercial truck from your different utilities. There's also the V2G, vehicle to grid technology, which is coming, where people could, store energy into their vehicle and get it back into the grid, in peak times, get some revenue out of it, or just the grid will, make more energy accessible on peak times. But regarding infrastructure, I think, it's quite easy to implement, and you need to get in close relationship with your different utilities, making sure that you have the right infrastructure for your needs, and making sure you have the right vehicle for your needs also at the same time.
Sarah, can I go over to you for a 30-second remark?
Sure. I would probably just add to that obviously for fleet managers, the question of the cost of implementing, installing infrastructure, and then dealing and managing your energy peaks, and and training also your staff. It's all other side costs that need to be taken into consideration, and of course, government support also needs to take that into consideration. In Quebec, it's I would say probably a little bit different because it's the sole supplier of energy at Hydro-Quebec, and then we've seen a lot of a dynamic of partnership between companies and Hydro-Quebec in terms of yes, implementing the infrastructure, but then dealing with peaks. And I suspect that it's a unique model that maybe not the case in all other provinces because of it's not being the sole distributor and producer of electricity.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for that.
I'm going
to, sorry, Patrick, I think I'm going to just close off the discussion, recognizing we have one more minute. Certainly from our perspective at the Pembina Institute, we see a need for a strong policy framework. I think we've made the case today through our panelists on the position that we are in. Canada is well positioned to build a ZEV economy. And I want to go to a last quote from another organization who's a proponent for a ZEV economy, and that's Jessie Pelchant, from senior researcher transportation of Équiterre. And she says, Canada is already home to businesses with auto parts and battery manufacturing expertise, and we can build on this by developing an industrial strategy around EV manufacturing, and we certainly concur with that. So on behalf of the Pembina Institute, I want to thank you all for joining. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for lending their time and their expertise on this matter. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all the questions, but we'll be sure to follow up as best as possible on your specific questions. And as I mentioned, we will circulate a recording of the webinar. So thanks very much to everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.